again to discuss things.
It was I who was the enemy.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen Character Discussions. I am Sid Part 2, joining me today is...
Alfie, a geek for fun.
Yay! Alfie, I'm just gonna corral you into this because you're young, impressionable, and I'm lazy. You're just gonna be my go-to partner for character discussions from now on out. Congratulations. You got promoted.
Okay, yes, senpai. Did you just make me a fucking Robin? Did I just get adopted by like a rich billionaire with parental issues?
Not the billionaire part. Sorry, but you do still have to wear the shorts. Anyway. And yes, you have to wax. Okay, anyway. So yeah, we're doing character discussions. Alfie picked this week. Alfie, who are we talking about?
We are talking about one of the most famous arch nemesises in the Marvel Kingdom, Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin.
Cool. So let me ask you this, because Green Goblin is one of those characters who I'm really trying to think now, because my exposure to Spider-Man comics is almost entirely wrapped up with Venom. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I honestly don't think I've ever read a comic book with Norman Osborn in it. Or the Green Goblin, for that matter. Yeah. If he is, it's like a brief little scene or something like that. So, my question becomes, he's been portrayed a number of different times now across different animated series and movies. What gets him the best?
That's a good question. Because kind of how, like... Norman Osborn's an interesting character for, like, adaptation specifically. Because so much of him originally was rooted in mystery. So much of him was about, oh, we know who the Green Goblin is. He's introduced in Amazing Spider-Man issue 12, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But Norman Osborn himself isn't introduced until Amazing Spider-Man, like, mid-20s. And you don't know who his identity is that whole time. So any adaptation that can kind of, like, tackle that, I like. So Spectacular Spider-Man did a really good job of that. But really, out of any Spider-Man villain, he's probably been adapted the most consistently well. Like, I thought Willem Dafoe did a really good job in the first Spider-Man movie. Like, he's crazy and corny and over the top as hell, but fucking Norman Osborn wears a, like, Halloween Goblin costume. He's supposed to be that. He's completely out of there and manic, and I think Willem Dafoe was, like, superb casting for that. The 90s animated show did a good job for me, although that was weird how, like, he came after the Hobgoblin for some reason in that. But yeah, just in general, I can't really think of something that got him wrong, except for, like, the latest Spider-Man cartoons where, like, he's, like, tied up with Venom in, like, creating the Goblin serum and craziness like that.
Yeah, Ultimate Spider-Man is the weirdest origin story for the Green Goblin. It's like, I took Venom's DNA and Spider-Man's DNA and combined them to make Goblin formula. Like, okay. Two questions. One, I've watched your show. Venom is created from Spider-Man's DNA, so you've combined Spider-Man's DNA with Spider-Man's DNA. And two, shouldn't Venom and Spider-Man make Carnage instead of fucking Green Goblin for no goddamn reason? That was really dumb. Ultimate Spider-Man had its moments, but that was not one of them.
No, indeed.
You know, it's interesting to hear then that Norman's been adapted, you know, differently but well across the board, because he's one of those characters I feel like people have, you know, reasonably wildly different takes on as you see him in different media. Like the Willem Dafoe versus the I forget the actor that plays him in the Amazing Spider-Man. Like those are two very different takes on that character.
That's true. Although the Amazing Spider-Man one, like Norman, you only see for like a scene on like a deathbed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
No, I mean,
he
you get
could
like some
have got more
flashbacks,
crazy.
and there's
yeah.
you get some flashbacks, and there's some implications about him though.
That's true. Although a lot of what... See, the thing with Norman as well is a lot of how he's depicted is almost like symbiotic with how much he's related to that version of Harry. Because Harry's adapted a lot of different ways, and his relationship with his father informs Norman's character a lot. They're always a duo.
Mm-hmm. I could see that.
Which is interesting as well, because Spider-Man is very much like, he starts off as, even if nowadays he's still kind of in the young hero territory and like a youth growing up, as much mileage as that may have run out, at least initially, he's always a youth-based superhero, so it makes sense that his ultimate villain would be the ultimate authority figure, and literally his best friend's dad, like an actual like person he's every kid, every principal who you have like no control over, even if they're a dick, every like relative or someone that you would love to like talk some sense into or argue back, but you just get domestic. You're young, you're a kid, you don't understand how the world works, kind of thing. Norman is that if Spider-Man is like the youth, and I think that's always a really powerful dichotomy. As Peter Parker grows older, it goes away from like youth just to being like the system, as like he becomes like a working man, and that becomes Spider-Man's appeal, is Norman just becomes the thing that beats the working man down, and that still really works as well.
Okay. And so when we talk about these things, it's, you know, all these characters have their different archetypes, and it's just kind of hard to differentiate them at points, you know? Mm-hmm. So I really like that diagnosis of the character there, because that makes him very distinct from Lex Luthor, particularly the youth versus the authority figure thing. But like Lex Luthor kind of has that, you know, working man, you know, versus the system kind of thing going for him.
That's true.
But it seems that with Norman, there's a bit of a different edge to it, because as you said at the beginning, Norman's fucking crazy. Like in a way that Lex Luthor is not. Lex Luthor is obsessed, but he's still a pretty rational guy. He makes poor decisions with his obsession, but they're like clearly defined and rational decisions. Whereas Norman Osborn is legitimately insane. And some of the stuff you've seen him do over the years, just, it doesn't make any goddamn sense, right?
Yeah, I think the best way I've heard someone put it is, if you like take the three biggest Spider-Man villains. So if Spider-Man's like message, with great power comes great responsibility. If you look at Dr. Octopus, he's the guy who blames everyone else for his responsibility. He's the guy that thinks everyone else is what caused him to be the way he is, and like lashes out. Eddie Brock, when done well as like a villain, is the guy who will hold everyone else but himself accountable, like super responsibility for like everyone else but himself. Norman is the guy, and this is why he's kind of the ultimate Spider-Man. Norman's the guy who the concept of responsibility never fucking entered his life. There's a great line in Spectacular Spider-Man where his basically his catchphrase become, "Don't apologize, son. I never do."
Ah, yeah.
Like it's precisely what he is, and that's why I guess the thing that makes him different from Lex is, Lex sees Superman and he sees something taking him away from like what he could have, whereas Norman sees Peter and that's what he wants in like Harry. He wants there's a lot of like, especially in Ultimate Spider-Man the comic, there's a lot of like, you are my real son, because in that he's directly responsible for the spider bite, which I do like. I would like if that carried over, because I do like just the creep. He is like, oh, I'm gonna raise you up, just do it my way. I know what's best for you, Peter. We're both scientists. We have a lot more in common than you did with your uncle. But if you step out of line, I will not hesitate to beat you to death in front of your arm. Are we clear? To like a 15-year-old kid. Like Lex has got some lines, but I don't think he'd do that shit.
Yeah, You kind of touched on something there, the idea of like never having responsibility enter his mind, and I think that plays really well given the fact that he's like the 1% kind of villain, that person who, I don't ever have to deal with the consequences of my actions, or even if I do, I'm so well protected and I'm so well established that even if I'm dealing with the consequences, I don't really have to. Like, this is an odd example, but the Gotham Tonight little mini episodes they did in the lead up to the Dark Knight, like these little like fake news segments about what's going on in Gotham. They actually got Christian Bale to cameo in one of those, and they're like, "What do you feel about the this person running for mayor or whatever?" He's like, "I don't really get involved in politics, but if anyone's willing to lower or raise speeding tickets, they have my vote." And so it's kind of that idea of like, okay, Bruce Wayne, what the fuck do you even care about speeding tickets? and the answer is he doesn't. He can drive his Lamborghini 150 miles an hour around town as much as he wants. He can rack up speeding tickets every 10 seconds. And it doesn't matter because he's so loaded, he can just pay them off and it's like no consequence to him. And I think Norman kind of has that same thing. He can do all these awful things, but because he has so much wealth and so much of like a system set up to benefit him, he doesn't have to be responsible. He doesn't have to care. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just really, really interesting.
Definitely. And I also feel like because I think it is a good thing that you touched on the Lex Luthor thing, because a lot of people do normally see him as like Marvel's closest Lex Luthor equivalent. I think that's a fair comparison, especially in his more modern recent interpretations.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a big thing to kind of differentiate him from that, even as close as he got to in like Dark Reign, when he was ruling the Secret Avengers and he was like the man about town, he was the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. and like he was the most Lex Luthor he's ever been. Even then, he's always more vulnerable in a way Lex never is. There's this really great scene where he's just sitting alone in his office and he's got complete control of the world. He's completely like in charge of everything. He's in the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier and he has like everything he's ever wanted, ultimate power. And he's just in a corner crying, asking the Green Goblin mask for help. And because he's just broken on the inside and he needs that mask in a way. Every Spider-Man comic kind of touches on Peter Parker's having trouble in his life, so he puts on the Spider-Man mask, swings away, and he feels a little better. Norman Osborn is that in the most twisted way possible, is when he was a kid and his dad beat him, and he would just wear like Halloween masks to try and hide that.
I didn't know that was part of his origin.
Yeah, Norman has like a really long and convoluted history, which...
a comic book character, what?
Spider-Man comic book character. This was all told in the Clone Saga, mind you.
Oh, God.
But it's legitimately some of the better parts of it, because it's at the tail end where they were like, all right, fuck it, let's just wrap this up, let's do something. It's in like this thing called like the Osborn journals they released, where to make every single messed up continuity thing they did in Spider-Man, they just basically systematically made, Norman Osborn did it. But it kind of...
Genie did it.
Yeah, basically. But it's like one of those things is we go into like his entire life story, and it is very much just like, almost like Peter Parker could have turned out this way, but then like much more like, I know like the child abuse thing is very much a trope in comic book supervillain backstories. They always try and throw it in with someone. But I think with Norman it specifically works because he acts very childish in how he goes about things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely see that. He is always like just, shouting out in a lot of ways. Just seems like he's one of those characters that doesn't feel like he ever really learned to deal with anything.
Yeah.
So I guess that idea of like he liked Halloween masks as like kind of an escape from his trauma is probably the best justification I could ever get for the Goblin costume.
Uh-huh.
'Cause it's kind of dumb.
It is, but it's dumb because all right. I feel like there's a way, like, do you think it's like a good design on paper? Like, even just getting rid of practicality and like imagining someone wearing it.
Okay, like, it's a good design, but it's never designed like it's a costume,
Yeah.
you know? Like, every time I see a really cool drawing of the Green Goblin, it looks like a freak of nature, like an actual monster. And anytime I see it drawn as a costume, it doesn't look like it doesn't look as good, right?
I get you.
Like, I really like it when it looks like it's alive and stuff, and it literally looks like a monster. That shit's cool. When it's not when it's drawn as a costume, though, you know, to quote Weird Al, Willem Dafoe's scarier without the mask.
That's precise. Like when he does that like creepy smile, that's the Green Goblin. If you just paint it green.
Yeah, exactly. So no, what do you think though?
All right, so I'm kind of torn because I do agree with you. Like if we're ever gonna, as much as people like to complain, oh, they've never done a real Green Goblin costume in live action, it's like, be sympathetic. He's not like the Joker where he's like probably the easiest villain you could ever put on screen. The Green Goblin is a really fucking hard design to translate. Like, that is no easy task to try and make that work, especially with the facial features. To let an actor emote under that thing. So I totally understand it. If like specifically like adaptions were like, I have to imagine a real person wearing this. But in comic book logic, where we see people wear like Scooby-Doo style, this mask is perfectly over their face and looks like a real person and they rip it off all the time. I can buy that multi-mogul billionaire Norman Osborn in his spare time with like his own like personal obsession would like make that, because he owns, again, like there's a lot of scenes where he like talks to Harry and stuff, and like Harry's not that much of a nerd. Harry's kind of just like, oh, I like football and stuff, and then Norman's like, oh, I used to like comic books when I was a kid. Why don't you like Peter? He liked comic books. Like he's that kind of like, I can see he would just do it as a side project, and then when he snapped, he turned that into what would be his Green Goblin costume. I like the relation he has with Peter there, where it's kind of a showmanship thing to put something on, but he's actually just a regular guy.
Okay, that's interesting. Because the idea of like putting on the mask and stuff, it has that symbolic meaning to it. You know, that we've lost that a lot in modern comics, where we've pared down modern superhero costume design. Now everyone's just wearing like fucking trench coats and shit. So that like the symbolism of putting on a mask and everything has gotten really blown up, and it can work in a cool way. I feel that the art doesn't really communicate that, though. Like, I'm trying to think of versions of the Green Goblin I've seen, and really everything that comes to mind for me that I thought, oh, that looks cool, has just looked like, you know, a serum or some kind of like transformation. And I honestly feel like that works better in some ways. You maybe lose the idea of like him talking to the mask and begging for help, but I feel that's really easy to replace if you just do like the reflection thing.
Yeah.
Like every time he looks in the mirror, he sees the goblin. I think that would be fine. And if you just treated the goblin form kind of like a werewolf transformation of some kind or something like that, I think it could work a lot better.
Yeah.
That being said, it has to look not like shit. Amazing Spider-Man 2.
So I guess I'll ask you then, because there's two very different approaches to that like formula transformation idea. There's he takes the formula and then he turns into what he regularly looks like in like 616. And then there's the ultimate version where he takes the formula and he turns into basically like the Hulk Goblin. I'm fond of both for different reasons, but I'm just curious, which is your preference there?
I mean, yeah, there's a part of me that goes, well, if you're gonna do it big, you know? That does kind of have a cool factor. The first time I saw the Green Goblin in the Ultimate Comics, I was like, whoa, okay, that's different. I don't necessarily like it, but it is different. I feel like the only reason not to do, like, if we could go back to 66 and tell Stanley, hey, listen, don't make it a mask, make it a physical transformation, and make it as big as possible, then that'd be a different thing. I feel like the reason that it doesn't work as well when he's gigantic is just because we've gotten so used to the Green Goblin is like a normal-sized dude who looks all freaky and rides around on a glider. And, I don't know, something about like a gigantic dude on a glider, it's losing something there, you know? I feel like we've gotten used to it one way, and hulking it out just feels like you might as well have just created another character.
Yeah, you lose a lot of the like scientific aspect of Osborn because he doesn't use the pumping guns. He can just make fireballs. He doesn't use like his other gadgets, like his like gauntlet lasers and like stuff that he would use as a scientist in his tech. Whereas like the hulkish Goblin just kind of like brute forces everything.
I mean, when he's throwing like fireballs and shit, he's basically a mythical beast at that point, you know. And you know, to the scientist thing, it's kind of interesting for Norman to be a scientist and to craft himself after a mythical creature. You know? Yeah,
that's actually a good point.
I guess I hadn't really thought about that until you just mentioned it right there, but yeah, just that's I don't know if anyone's done anything with that. That's kind of a neat little road that could be gone down there.
I think again, the closest I can remember to that is I remember in like there's like a big book on like the making of the Spider-Man movies, like the Raimi ones, and in the beginning they say they wanted Norman Osborn to have like in his office is like all these cultural masks of different like gods and culture and stuff. So maybe that was what they kind of touched on as just like a background note for like aesthetic purposes. But in like Spectacular they have like in the end of like the second season, like the Green Goblin's fighting Spider-Man and he's just quoting Shakespeare. I forget which play it is, but he's quoting Shakespeare the entire time, and it's about like an elf or a fairy. Like it's one of those plays. I'm English and I don't know the play.
You're gonna have to go back to your grade school and turn in your diploma.
Basically. But yeah, so I think they touch on it, but it's certainly not used on nearly as much as you'd think, given what we just like discovered in a Skype call.
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting idea. Don't tell the people who use Skype. We're gonna sound old.
I guess in Ultimate as well, he kind of had when he comes back to like the final fight he has with Peter. He is on kind of like he keeps mentioning like God sent him, and he has like a very like I am a messenger of God, because he goes for like in Ultimate he has a thing where like he keeps dying, but the Ultimate Goblin serum like keeps reviving him, and it gets stronger each time. So that's kind of like goes with the like he doesn't face any responsibility for his actions, like he just keeps coming back better and better.
Death does not bar him.
Yeah, and that's in sixth. That's one of the only reasons I like people kind of argue back and forth in the Spider-Man fandom. Like, did Norman Osborn deserve to come back after he killed Gwen Stacy? Like that was such like an important issue that he died on like the Goblin glider. That's such an iconic death. Did he get to deserve to come back? And I'm kind of one of the people who's like, no, I'm glad he did. Because all the best Green Goblin stories happen after he came back, because the writing's improved since like we've learned more as writers and we get more mature stories, so we get a lot more mature stories with him and Peter back and forth with that backstory of, oh, you kill Gwen. But also, I like the idea that literally nothing can stop this guy, because he just does not. The universe is like rewarding him as much as it's taking away from Peter.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I guess, man, I might need to read some Norman Osborn stuff.
I think I'm so surprised you've said they've read it, because I think he's like right up your alley. He's got that kind of like.
I'm not a Marvel guy, you know.
True.
It's just true. All it comes down to. I'm just not a Marvel guy. There's a few niches I'm really into. I'm trying some stuff out. I'm reading Doctor Strange in space.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's fighting Galactus right now. It's kind of hilarious. Or dealing with Galactus, I should say. But I don't know, man. It's just like it does sound really interesting. What about Norman do you think is like kind of a lower point to the character, or something that's like, yeah, he does this thing, but it's just like this is why some people don't like him, or this is why this part of the character that just doesn't quite work.
I think. All right. I'm gonna try and avoid the elephant in the room because that's like a kind of like a low point that everyone tries to write off. I'm gonna try and get like a legitimate. This is an actual like okay story, but something that just doesn't work for him. He can be uncomfortable to read a lot of the time, especially with like Harry and how he interacts with Peter. Is like he can get kind of just like. You don't really Spider-Man's different than like Batman, because when the Joker will have some wins, but normally Batman will stop him and they'll normally be like, oh, there's a happy day or something. Norman literally spent like over a year in charge of the Marvel universe with like no repercussions, and was running books for a while. Like he was fighting Iron Man in like Matt Fraction's Iron Man run. He was like in the Avengers run. He was doing everything, and people did kind of say, Jesus Christ, I fucking hate this dude. But I like as a villain, but some people are just like, you can make them too insufferable, where like, again, he hasn't really got a cool design, which a lot of people go with. Like people like Venom because he looks badass. Green Goblin doesn't necessarily look badass a lot of the time. He just kind of looks freaky, especially when Norman Osborn himself has got that ridiculous like cornrow haircut.
Yeah, I never, like, the 90s animated series always had the worst design for both Harry and Norman.
Yeah.
Where, like, they had the fucking, like, yeah, I don't even know what that was. These weird stripy hairs.
They've had it
since
the 60s, horizontal. And they've still got it now.
What is that, like, did they get waves? Like,
I've seen so many people on Twitter just be like posting pictures of Norman and Harry Osborn and be like, bro, I went to the barber and asked me, yo, what your fam, what you want? I just killed Gwen Stacy. Oh, don't want to say no more.
Yeah, it's a weird one. Yeah, so design wise, the haircut's a little odd. Good point. I don't know. Trying to think of like other things that might have like kept me kind of at arm's length from the character, because generally I've liked him in any Spider-Man stuff I've seen. He's never been my favorite. Do you think it's fair to say that Willem Dafoe's performance works better as you get older and kind of clue into those movies?
Oh, definitely.
Than it did as a kid? Yeah, because that's kind of how I feel as I think about it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything like about Norman that's kept me away from him besides just I'm not a super big comic fan, or Marvel fan rather, and it just, that universe just doesn't attract my attention as much.
And I think the biggest thing, specifically just as I've come to know like your taste, Norman Osborn is a Marvel character through and through. And for anyone who doesn't know what I'm going to say, there is every single one of his stories is, this is because he did this in this issue and this issue, and it's all history. He is a character that he can have fun one-off stories and they'll be like really good, entertaining. But if you really want to like appreciate like Norman Osborn like through and through and like get why like I think he's Spider-Man's like ultimate arch nemesis, like and forever will be, and I think he's not quite on that level as Joker and Lex Luthor, but I think he's like B-tier supervillain like in terms of comic books, is because he died in one of the most important Spider-Man comics of like ever made, and then he came back in one of the most convoluted Spider-Man stories ever. So like you got the death of the Gwen Stacy and the Clone Saga. That's a big gap in time when Norman Osborn was not in Spider-Man comics and he didn't get to appear in like anything, and then he comes back, and then every time he comes up, because he's so important, it's the big deal, it's the event is when Norman Osborn is here. And then he's in Secret Invasion and Dark Reign. It's very hard to get him out of the continuity and enjoy Norman Osborn as a character because he's too integral to Spider-Man.
Okay, so like I'm trying to think here. He's introduced, you said Green Goblin's introduced in issue 12?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, and Gwen Stacy and Green Goblin dies after killing Gwen Stacy when?
121 and 122.
Okay, so he's around for a little over 100 issues.
Well, he has amnesia for like 80 of those. And,
okay.
Yeah, and he's just Norman Osborn and not the Green Goblin.
All right, so I mean, there's a decent amount of time that you can just skip. So like, maybe he's around for 30 issues.
Oh,
like
issue I just got it up here. Issue 14 is the Green Goblin's first appearance. Never mind.
Okay, all right. I mean, but you were close. That's pretty damn good. Especially with those weird numbers. Like, it's easy to remember. Oh, the Joker was introduced in Batman #1, but fuck if I could tell you when the Riddler was introduced. No, that's... So, like, he's maybe got, like, what, 30, 40 issues of, like, actual story in the original run that you could read and just... Yeah, that's good. You've got, like, the best version of this character.
Kind of. Because, again, for the majority of it, you don't know who he is.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally the story where he finds out Peter Parker is Spider-Man is the same story where you find out he's Norman Osborn. And at that point, it's so weird. At that point, Harry Osborn and Norman Osborn had only been introduced 2 issues earlier. So imagine if this happened today, where you've been reading a run for like 30 issues, and this long-running background villain, who's like one of the most impactful villains ever, has all this mystery been built up, and he's a character that just got introduced. It's one of the reasons Steve Ditko left the book.
Really?
Yeah, he wanted Norman Osborn just to be a random guy, like the rest of the Spider-Man Rose Gallery, but like Electro isn't anyone Peter Parker knows, because he wouldn't believe how like. Oh, it doesn't make any sense that Norman Osborn would be knows Peter Parker personally. But Stanley was like, oh, it'd be more drama. I side with Stan because I think that's a really good idea. But it's also one of those things is, yeah, Stan, you could have introduced him a little bit earlier.
Yeah, it would have worked better if it had actually been set up. I guess he really benefits from just, actually, it benefits from what people have done with it after the fact then.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess let's go ahead and move on to recommendations. I'm gonna cheap out and I'm just gonna recommend Willem Dafoe. Just go watch like a supercut of all of the Green Goblin scenes from the first Spider-Man movie, and also like the repeat version of him going, "Finish it!" That's probably my favorite scene. It's either that or
Sleep.
No. First we attack his heart. That's my favorite. Like I don't know if you remember these, but I remember these walkie-talkies that were Green Goblin and Spider-Man from the first Raimi movie. And they look like action figures, but they're actually walkie-talkies.
Oh my god!
Do you remember those?
I had the Goblin one!
Okay. I was trying to convince my manager at work that we need walkie-talkies, at least for just the two of us, and he could carry around the Green Goblin one, and I could carry around the Spider-Man one, just so every so often I could be like, "First we attack his heart!"
Oh my god, you're giving me a major nostalgia trip there. Okay, I need to calm down for a second. Oh boy, that's a deep reach.
Anyway, what else will you recommend for Green Goblin?
All right. Of course, I'd recommend just checking out his first appearance. It's a really fun issue with like the Hulk in it, and he gets Spider-Man to go on a movie set and tricks him into that. It's really weird, but it's really fun. And then just if you want just like the best Green Goblin stories, it's going to be The Night Gwen Stacy Died. Is just, I think you can go into it without barely. I think it works. Just it's one of those Spider-Man issues, and it's so seminal. And normally comics that get built up as this is the story that changed things forever don't necessarily live up to, like, Death in the Family doesn't necessarily live up to its reputation. I think that's one of the exceptions. I think that is still a really, really solid book, and I would definitely recommend people check it out. And then in terms of just actually good Norman stories in the modern age, you're gonna get a kick out of this one. There is a really good Norman Osborn story, a Spider-Man story called Death in the Family. I can't believe they fucking got away with it, but it's about Norman Osborn basically, because at this point in comics history, Harry Osborn had died, because he had been the Green Goblin for a while, and Norman basically has a midlife crisis and tries to get Spider-Man to push to the edge so he'll kill him, and it's really, 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 really good, especially at the end where it's just Norman and Spider-Man sitting down and having a conversation with each other, and it's like 3 pages of just conversation. Art's a little rough. It's actually kind of really, really rough because it's that really early 2000s comic book art, but I think the narrative itself is still really good. And apart from that, I check any of the like Dark Reign, the Cabal, and you just get to see Norman Osborn interact with like Loki and Doctor Doom and like all these different villains as they kind of rule the Marvel universe. It was a really fun time.
Okay, cool. All right, Alfie, thanks for doing this. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I'm a geek for fun.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.